vampire character type has a long history behind it. That is because there are so many different depictions and inclusions of vampires in film for decades. But how did that come to be? How do we have the same basic character type across nations in so many different and various cultural films? Well, we do have the famous Bram Stoker's Dracula, but we also have very, very early on-screen depictions. Vampires across history focus on a fear of the unknown, the fear of the other. A vampire is an intruder to the land and cycle of life. But watching Frederick Moranu's Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, wow, I got that right, that was a tongue twister. We not only fear the unknown of the vampire, but we also fear the land of the vampire itself, the vampire's nation. Released in 1922, Nosferatu is a vampiric horror film. It's horror born from its themes of the unknown, invasion, and consumption. Nosferatu, in terms of transnational cinema, travels between different nations and cultures within the film, and inspired many vampire films since, outside of the film, and outside of its original nation, Germany. The vampire character type has grown to be transnational as other nations put their own influence on the vampire character type and make their own films with it. One of the reasons Nosferatu was so successfully accessed outside of Germany was because it was a silent film. As Stephen Rollet states in his book, Transnational Cinema: An Introduction, silent cinema was a transnational phenomenon. Films didn't need to be dubbed or subtitled, and intertitles could easily be changed, end quote. So, although Nosferatu was made in Germany by a German director, national in that point, when it gained popularity outside of Germany, plenty of people were able to watch it. Just by translating the intertitles and subtitles, you had a globally consumable film in its entirety. And if dedicated, you could watch Nosferatu without the intertitles. The music, shot composition, and body language tells plenty of where the horror lies in the film. And speaking of where the horror exactly lies within the film, it's amazing just how much of the film's horror comes not from Graf Orlok, the vampire, but from the land. The film spends a lot of time between Hutter and Orlok once he's at Orlok's estate, but it takes its time with its settings. We don't even make it to the bridge to Transylvania until we are 20 minutes into the film. The whole of Act 1 takes 25 minutes to even get to Orlok. And what we are doing in that time, well, we are in the town or at Hutter's home. We are setting up the rest of the world with these two other locations, the town and Hutter's home. This is Hutter's world, where he knows how people act, he is happy, and has lasting relationships with others. We can then compare these to the bare and unknown land of Graf Orlok's estate when he enters it. And it's interesting how in Nosferatu, Hunter travels to Transylvania to go meet the vampire on the vampire's nation. I'll go over by what I mean by vampire's nation in a moment, but a lot of depictions of vampires have them migrating from place to place. The transnational object in those films are the vampires themselves. It is just the vampires that is unknown. They are the only danger. They are an intruder in a land that isn't their own. But in Nosferatu, we meet Graf Orlok on his own land. He is rightly in his own house in the vampire's nation. The vampire's nation, in the context of this podcast, is the land that a vampire owns or land that is known to be owned by a vampire. It can have a community on it that is not a community of vampires, so long as that community of humans acknowledge and know that the land itself is owned by a vampire, and they're simply there without owning the land themselves. In Nosferatu, the land across the bridge is known by the townsfolk as a dangerous land that they do not want to go to. So they transfer ownership to Graf Orlok simply because they don't want the land, so they're transferring the ownership. The importance of the vampire's nation in Nosferatu is not just that the land is owned by the vampire though, but that is all they know about it. All they know about the land is that a vampire owns it, and there are supposed werewolves roaming around as well, in the darkness. There is a fear of the unknown of the land of the vampire's nation, and what on earth could be living on it or underneath it. Nations nowadays have massive communities of people, and while there doesn't seem to be a massive body of people, or even multiple people from the same descent or religion around Orlok's estate, we can say transnationally that Hutter goes from one culturally distinct group of people to another. At first, his family and loved one Ellen, to the lively townsfolk around Transylvania, to Graf Orlok's estate. The film tries to separate the land of the townspeople and Orlok by using music and film techniques. When we first venture to Orlok's estate, one of the camera shots is an up shot of a tower in the estate. The up-facing shot gives the tower this enormous presence when then compared to Hutter in the next shot looking quite scared out of his wits. The town is filled with people, lively chatting to each other. We are cramped in rooms filled with people and furniture, but when in Orlok's estate, that is only Orlok, and shots of empty walls, expanding buildings, and lots of shadows. Musically as well, there is a purposeful change in the sounds when we leave the town and go to Orlok. In the version we watched, we go from the happy woodwinds of the town to the descending and dramatics of low brass and stringed instruments. This clear separation in the tone of music helps show how different the two sides of the bridge really are, and foreshadows the danger of the new land that Hutter is now in. By unnerving us, the fear of the unknown, shown through the music of the film, now not only includes Graf Orlok, but Transylvania, Graf Orlok's land, the vampire nation in its entirety. A segment of the definition of transnational films focuses on the transnational land that moves forward the plot of a film. Well, in Nosferatu, the land not only is important and moves forward the plot of the film, setting-wise, but it's vital to the themes of horror in the film. When talking to the townsfolk, we are introduced to the land around Orlok's estate before Orlok himself. The land of thieves and phantoms, end quote, is what the Orlok's land is called near the beginning of the film by the townspeople themselves. No one wants to go there. The village people won't cross the bridge or even get too close to it, and they don't like to go around there near dark, warning Hutter that there are dangers such as werewolves venturing for a hunt during the nights around there. So that's my interpretation of where the themes of horror in Nosferatu lie, in the land as well as the characters, and the transnational qualities within the film. But when you normally think of Nosferatu, you think of Dracula, you think of the vampire, the character type we now see in so many variations that go from sparkling to despising garlic. Similarly, in 1922, what people took away from Nosferatu was this vampire character type. Film-wise, then comes Dracula, Dracula's Daughter, House of Dracula, all US films, Vampire, Vampyr, a French-German film, Terror in the Crypt, a Spanish film, Daughters of Darkness, which sounds like the most epic band name ever, is a film made from the combined efforts of Belgium, France and Germany, Japan, Mexico, Italy, the Philippines. Every nation has their vampire films. There are also many transnational vampire films, and a big part was that of the transnational influence that Nosferatu had in the 20th century. As I mentioned earlier, Nosferatu is a silent film. It can be watched and understood by anyone. As long as the film is physically available, anyone could watch it. And everyone did watch it. And so it spawned, or at least massively boosted, the vampire character type, the human enough-like manifestation of the unknown or the other in film. People seem to focus on the plot near the end of the film in Nosferatu, where Graf Orlok invades Hunter's home and consumes his Ellen, which is a whole other world of horror in its own right. But what doesn't get used as often is this idea of the vampire's nation, the vampire's land. There are films with castles on hills and underground vampire caves where the land and the vampires inhabit is integral to the themes of the film. A modern example of the vampire's nation can be seen in the 2004's Van Helsing, directed by Stephen Sommers, where Count Dracula has his own land within his castle. But the focus placed on the land and travel across land as seen in Nosferatu does not come across as a focus in Van Helsing, much more of an action film than an underlying horror. If the vampire's nation was transnationally used as much as the vampire character type, what kind of films would we have?